Hi there. So our goal today is to go through problem solving, and there'll be a couple worksheets that I point you to. Problem solving is born out of the idea that we have about four options that we can engage in when we have a situation that arises that we don't like and that we would rather have go away. Usually it accompanies negative affect. So either we can problem solve, we can use emotion regulation skills to tolerate the negative emotion or distress that would otherwise accompany the issue itself. We can stay miserable, or we can do nothing. And so problem solving is one such option. And we are able to do this. I'm going to point you now to Emotion Regulation Handout 12. When an emotion does not necessarily align with the situation, or that it is an emotion that is amenable to change. So we'll walk by this step by step. Keep Handout 12 out, and let's get started. The first step is to describe the situation. This relates back to our initial emotion regulation or mindfulness skills, rather, where we have a situation that comes to hand, and our goal is to describe it in its full context. What is it that we see? What are the facts of the situation? It can even involve what it is that we feel. We describe it to the best of our ability in entirety. The next step is to then check the facts, which we've gone over in previous weeks. It becomes important to check the facts because that is what lays the groundwork for the problem solving itself. And so checking the facts can sometimes be tricky because, dependent upon what it is that we tell ourselves, the story we tell ourselves, that we can construct a situation where we're checking the facts in a way that aligns with our emotions and sometimes not necessarily with the facts. So there's a star by this one because it can be a little bit tougher and certain things can get in our way, including our perceptions and what we believe to be true as compared to what the facts are themselves. The simplest example of this is if we don't study for a test, we can think that we are graded unfairly on that test itself, or we can think about our person-centered factors, ourselves, and what we did to give rise to that. And so oftentimes I'll encourage myself, and I think we can each encourage ourselves, to think about our internal locus and those things that we did to give rise to a situation. The next step is to identify your goal. So this again is like balancing short-term versus long-term goals and thinking about whether or not we're responding to an emotion and identifying that goal. Sometimes a good clue for that is if we are checking the facts and we're like, well, my goal is to feel better in this situation, and so I'm going to take these next steps in order to feel better. That can be a signal to us that perhaps it's our emotion that we're responding to most, and it can encourage us to take a step back to see if we should use mindfulness, emotion regulation, or distress tolerance skills as compared to problem solving skills in order to proceed with next steps. Here's where I think it really bears mentioning, again, that there is problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping. There will be times at which the problem at hand is not something that is amenable to change by checking the facts and identifying our goal. The easiest example of this one to understand for kiddos, and I think adults too, is when we're dealing with grief or a death. In those cases, we can't necessarily solve the fact that someone's in a physical state that we care about, like being hospitalized, or that someone has passed away. And in that case, it's a good signal if that's the most extreme, perhaps, signal or example of responding to an emotion and then using emotion-focused coping or distress tolerance skills as compared to checking the facts. Next, we brainstorm. And here, I'm going to point us in subsequent slides, and when we go through together, ways that we can brainstorm the most exhaustive list of things that we can do. What is it that we can do that aligns with our goal, and in our goal really aligns with our values? What possible solutions exist? And here we get creative. It can be, again, we want to make it an exhaustive list of everything it is that we could possibly do, which sometimes includes nothing. So again, in thinking about everything that we can do, we want to make sure that we are going through all things. So between these steps, again, check the facts has a star by it, because sometimes it's not until we get to the brainstorming goal that we realize the emotion does not fit the facts, and no, acting on the emotion is not effective. And sometimes it's in that brainstorming step that we're like, hey, we're getting through these steps and these don't seem like they're effective. So either there we can change our thoughts to fit the facts, do opposite action. Even knowing the facts sometimes does not change the emotions. So in this situation, we would change our behavior, and Paul will go through that a bit more. And if perhaps the emotion doesn't fit the facts, but yes, acting on the emotion is effective, that's where we go to some of our interpersonal affective skills and being, yes, mindful of our current emotions, and then also gracefully accepting the consequences of acting on the emotion. So somewhere between brainstorming and choosing a solution is another good place to double check how well our emotions fit the facts and whether the solutions with which we're coming up align with our emotions. After identifying a solution, we put that plan into action. And then we evaluate the results. This piece is where a bunch of outcomes are possible. It's possible that everything goes very well. And if that's the case, great, then we keep it moving. If it does not go according to plan, this is another step where we can go back a couple steps back to choosing a solution. Once we've brainstormed, we do have a whole list, and this can be an actual written exercise where we're sitting down and writing out those pieces. And once we have that list, in evaluation of our results, sometimes we have like a multi-pronged approach where we're using more than one solution. Sometimes the solution doesn't work according to our plans because of external factors that are outside of our control. Sometimes they don't work because of internal factors. Either way, in any of those scenarios, I think it's a real moment for us to engage in reflection. So in this step, I always add that even when things go well, it's worth taking a step back to do a review of why it went well. It's kind of like when we are taking a test. Sometimes we're guessing, and it can be helpful to be like, oh, I guessed right on this answer, so now I know that this is the correct answer for this question. In the same way, I went with my gut. And it can be helpful to take a step back and see why that result happened to work in a given situation. So here I'm going to point us to Emotion Regulation Worksheet 8. And this takes us through each of the steps that I just mentioned. What's the problem? Describe the problem prompting your emotions. What makes the situation a problem? Again, that's a helpful step. Is this actually a problem? Or is this a place where my emotion warrants some other skill set, whether it's the tip skills, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's taking a step back, the stop skill, and engaging with other people that we trust and asking collateral opinion. We move on to checking the facts to make sure we have the right problem. Have we identified it correctly? Rewrite the problem if needed to stick with the facts. And then short-term goals are what is most helpful to focus on, but also counterbalancing them against long-term goals can be helpful in helping us to also check our emotion. The brainstorming has many lines, and here, which two ideas look best invite us to rank those that we think might be most helpful. There's a pros and cons table here, and one additional pros and cons table that I use often and will walk through with us when we get together is that every solution actually has 4 sides. So if we were only looking at solution 1, it could be the pros to engaging in it, the pros to not engaging in it, the cons to engaging in it, and the cons to not engaging in it. Oftentimes we just think of the pros and cons, but there can be cons to not doing something and pros to not doing something that sometimes get left out. When we choose a solution to try, we often break it down into the most digestible steps for ourselves. If we are dealing with a broken car and we are thinking about whether pursuing like insurance against someone, like a claim if we were hit, there still might be little steps that we're taking, like contacting the insurance company, contacting the body shop, and writing each of those micro steps down can help us decide which ones we should engage in first that would most align with our values-oriented goals, and also help us to more formally write out or document what happens. Ultimately, we are evaluating whether we reach our goal. If not, it's helpful to take a step back and see what we can do next. Sometimes that means going back to our brainstormed solutions list and seeing if another one might fit better. Other times it acts as another check to see if we need to bring on some emotion-focused coping skills for distress tolerance or otherwise. And even when we reach our goal, I'll say one more time that I find it personally helpful to see why I reached that goal and what problem-solving skills I enacted that enabled me to reach that conclusion, because there's a lot of positive learning that can occur there. Sometimes there's a new problem to be solved as we solve the first problem at hand. And so if a new problem arises, this whole process can be undertaken again, or it can be shortcut to the brainstormed solutions. Again, we'll go through this piece around pros and cons together. If you have a problem that you are thinking through right now, this can be an exceptionally helpful worksheet to go through. So I encourage you to complete it in this interim, and it can help with our discussion when we get together. And it's always here as a tool. So I'm going to ask you to think about a few different questions for yourself internally. When can it be hard to check the facts? What gets in the way of problem solving for you? Sometimes, for many of us, including myself, it can be when we have a fervent belief that we're right in that situation and that there shouldn't be a problem in the first place. So again, taking a step back, describing the problem, allowing ourselves to check the facts can help to disengage from that. There could be another bunch of things that get in the way of problem solving. I urge you to think about what those personal level factors might be and what vulnerability factors might get in the way. Are we over caffeinated? Do we not have enough sleep? Are we hangry? The last question asks us to think about when are we most likely to problem solve? Are you the kind of person that needs to write it out? Is there a time of day that works better to kind of walk through those pieces? What works best, or when have you seen the best outcomes when you've tried to problem solve in the past? Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you all when we get together. I will now stop this recording. Thanks.